Welcome back to another episode of Product Espresso, where two caffeine fueled product managers apply 8 to 10 bars of critical thinking or research pressure on a topic to extract useful content. What do you think of that intro?
I like that. It's very behind the scenes of what happens when you make coffee.
I had to find the exact specification, and I looked for it, and I ended up on a document created by the National Institute of Italian Espresso. And they have a booklet on like the certified Italian espresso. So it has to be made according to very strict specifications. And one of them is 9 bars of water pressure with a tolerance of plus minus 1 bar. That's where I got the 8 to 10 bars. Anyway, today we're talking about a viral trend. And let's start with how it began first. A couple weeks ago, OpenAI released this new feature within ChatGPT. They released it with their GPT 4.0 model, and the feature was an image generation feature. This is the evolution of DALL-E, where now the image generation has been integrated deeply within ChatGPT. And what they did was they tried to provide like more useful image generation, and they offered a few improved capabilities. And these capabilities are great. So they have more accurate text generation. So the text in the images that it generates are pretty accurate. And since it's within ChatGPT, you can do what they call multi-turn generation, where you can refine the image that you generate through a conversation with the chatbot. They do a really good job now of keeping the appearance of characters, even within the images, consistent between multiple iterations of the image that it generates. It also is great at following instructions, does a much better job than previous models. Has great attention to detail. You can ask it to generate multiple objects within the image, and it'll do all of that really, really well. I think the official announcement says it can handle about 10 to 20 different objects. It also has in context learning, which means you can provide it context in the form of your own images, and it can learn from that. You could get the model to modify that image in many different styles. And this, we'll see, is what led to that viral trend. But it also has really good knowledge of the world, like good general knowledge, because DALL-E previously, I believe it didn't have all the context that ChatGPT has. It doesn't have the training of ChatGPT. So like now you can ask it to generate like infographics, and it does a much better job than before. Nothing perfect, but I could ask it to generate an infographic on the types of penguins on the herd in McDonald Islands, let's say. And it'll do a fairly decent job of that. So they launched this new feature. It did well in its first week. The stat is 130 million users used the feature, and they used it to generate about 700 million images, which is insane. I don't know if you read about the tweets that Sam Altman put out when this was going on, and he's like pleading with users, please stop generating images, and our GPUs are melting. Which, I mean, there might have been some truth to that, but things like, yeah, does anybody have a spare 100,000 GPUs that we can use? I think it was just a bit of PR.
I saw that, yeah.
But yeah, you think people immediately started using this for very important, productive, very creative work, right? But the internet never ceases to amaze.
Yeah, I think in terms of the usage and part of the reason you saw like 700 million pictures was just like a lot of remixing that was happening, which wasn't possible with Dolly. I see that people were using it for recreating memories. Like that's one of the most common things. Like you could easily turn your personal photos, be it like family portraits or like your childhood snapshots, into Ghibli style art with a very simple prompt as you upload a picture and all you have to say is make this look like a Ghibli scene. And you get back something that's stunning. And I feel like Ghibli art has a bit of warmth to it, which also makes it look cute. So in other words,
Yeah.
if you are someone who has grown up watching Ghibli anime movies, you have that nostalgia factor. So I feel like people were getting something back that was actually invoking an emotion, not just giving them a natural image. Uh, Part of it was also trend driven, as you see more people using it, being impressed by it, you want to be part of the trend. So recreating memories was definitely one of the common use cases that I've seen. I also feel there was a bit of a entertainment and play factor here because you could
Yeah.
easily create Ghibli memes that added another dimension. People are using it to create like pictures on social media. And one example that comes to mind that was very impressive is where someone created a video, an anime style video of Severance as a Ghibli short film. And I watched it. I thought it worked very well. They captured the essence of the show perfectly, but that Ghibli style added just another dimension. I felt it was like part cute, part creepy. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's impressive, right? So on one hand, you have nostalgia. On the other hand, you also have creative ability that it's unlocking, which is something that can easily translate into the professional use of it. I've definitely seen marketing material where like they're showing Ghibli art. I don't know like how much it actually made it to professional use or if people are just like trying to experiment with it. But the idea is that it sticks. It sticks to the audience. It stands out in a way where like you can have a boring infographic or you can have a fun element with Ghibli style, which brings a sense of like creativity. It brings a sense of rareness to some extent. Part of it feels magical. So
Yeah.
I think in a nutshell, it's being used to remix existing work where you're recreating photos, recreating some memories, but also like recreating a popular show like Severance into an anime and some professional use. And I think that's just been an interesting piece to observe.
Yeah. Studio Ghibli style images. First of all, some people call it Ghibli, some people call it Ghibli. I don't know. I've been sticking with Ghibli. But not everyone is a fan of this trend. Right? There are multiple angles of backlash. Like one of them is obviously the copyright infringement. People think, yeah, obviously OpenAI trained its models on copyrighted frames from Studio Ghibli. And that's still a legal gray area. The courts haven't yet decided on, like, there's no definitive ruling on AI training and the data's like fair use policy. So that's still up in the air, but there is a case to be made for copyright infringement. Style replication, like generally, you can't really copyright an artistic style. You can copyright a piece of art using a particular style, but not the style itself. But these models do it so accurately, they can so accurately replicate somebody's artistic style that it feels a bit iffy to not compensate the artist for it. There are also privacy risks. People talking about, yeah, you're putting all your private personal images into these models, sending it to these companies. So there are obviously some privacy risks there, and risks to climate change and energy use. Like there's an estimate that it takes 1.5 kilowatt hour to generate 1,000 images, which is a lot. And people have been generating millions of images. So the amount of energy that it takes to generate these images for something, I mean, you could call it something trivial, is not really good for the environment. But other than the usual types of backlash, this one had some significant backlash from die-hard Studio Ghibli fans. And they were not so happy with this trend, were they?
No, there's been a strong pushback, and from what I've read, the pushback is real. Like, I'm a bit torn about like the whole discussion about this because I'm not like a Ghibli fan. It's an impressive visual style for me, but it doesn't like create any emotional reaction. So, as you said, like the question about the copywriting and how these models are trained, that's just a broader discussion happening along with the environmental concerns. But in this specific case, like there is an emotional and cultural element which is causing the fans to have a strong pushback against it. Because if I think about art, like Miyazaki has a signature which is hand-drawn sketches with details in there that just like are important. Like if you think about Van Gogh, he had a brush stroke style. And in
Yeah.
art, like every artist has a style which creates their identity. That's what they become known for. It can be recreated. but when you recreate, you're still appreciating the art. So one of the best places that I could go to was go to a Reddit, which is specifically for Ghibli. And there, people are not just discussing the movies they have watched, they're actually sharing hand-drawn fan art. And that's celebrated there. Like you post something that you've created on your own. People, you see upvotes, people are appreciating it. They are appreciating the sketch, they're appreciating the watercolors, they're appreciating the effort. Now, with AI, all of that effort goes away. So when you digitize it, you're able to reproduce something within seconds, but you're just diluting the effort value there, which is why the Reddit fan is against that. Like there are threats that basically ban AI. Like the moderator is clearly saying that if you upload anything that's AI generated, it would be deleted. So I think it's an interesting take on it where remixing is allowed as long as it's hand-drawn because there's the effort, it's sort of replicating what Miyazaki has been doing himself, like that's what the studio is known for. As soon as you add an AI element there, it removes the effort and people are like not thrilled by it. And that's the nuance. The reason I feel torn is because I feel like yes, if you can create that art, if you have the talent, if you're willing to put in the effort, you can definitely enjoy it. But for someone who wants to experience like their own photos, for instance, they may not have been able to do it, but now they are able to use this tool and they are able to like bring back certain like memories and it creates an emotional reaction. I know I read at least like one news about like someone who was able to recreate some of their memories. They were from a Japanese descent, and then when he created it, they were just amazed by the output. And they felt like they were able to relive some of their like childhood moments. They were able to just think about like some family memories, which they may not have been able to look at in the past. So I think it's a bit of a cultural versus like technology versus accessibility play here. So I don't know, like it's hard to come to a conclusion. I don't know if it's about like gatekeeping a technology that has been created or if it's like making it accessible. But the question is, where does that accessibility cross the line into like exploiting the technology?
Yeah, I can definitely see both sides. The argument from either side makes sense. Like my family WhatsApp group had been full of these Ghibli style images. And it was nice. It was nice to see these old photos in this cute, nostalgic aesthetic. That was a lot of fun. But I can see the argument from that Reddit community of Studio Ghibli fans, where they believe Studio Ghibli stands for hand drawn art. Like it's one of the perhaps the last standing studios that are still doing hand drawn 2D animation at such a large scale. And so they want to preserve that. They want to preserve the hand drawn element of it, which AI completely takes away. And a lot of this, I think, has to do with the philosophy of the founder of Studio Ghibli, Hayao Miyazaki. And over the last week, I've been reading and thinking about everything that Miyazaki has said. And his philosophy is very interesting. So, first of all, he believes that art comes from lived experiences of humans. So, he argues that Ghibli's artistry emerges from the animator's own life experiences. And that's a quality that algorithms cannot replace. And a lot of this backlash on AI generated images comes from Miyazaki's own statements in a 2016 documentary. It's a really short segment where Miyazaki is being shown some AI generated content. He's looking at like some pretty creepy zombie animation and he's really put off by it. And he has some pretty harsh things to say to the engineers that made that AI animation. He says it's an insult to life itself. And we humans seem to be like losing faith in ourselves and we're nearing the end of time. So he felt really strongly about it. He talks about a personal experience where there's a friend of his who finds it hard to high five him because his hand has really stiff muscles and he has this disability. And Miyazaki says that he can't really watch this AI generated stuff because the AI can never feel that, has no idea what like pain and disability is. So I think that changed my initial perception because my initial thought was, yeah, Miyazaki is like, he's an 84-year-old man. And so you could think, is this just like a grumpy old man who hates technology? But that's not really what it is because he he uses technology. We have to think of it from the perspective of somebody who has run a studio for decades. And so he has seen emerging technologies and he has seen what they can do. And he has adopted a lot of it. There's a lot of like scanning of the hand-drawn artwork. There's the finalizing the film production elements uses a lot of technology. There's some amount of digital painting over like hand-drawn frames that Studio Ghibli does. So this is not just about like a hatred for change and hatred for new technology. He believes in a very specific philosophy and he's a humanist. So he believes that machines and technology should not replace the actual artistic expression. There's a famous quote that he has in which he says, "Do everything by hand, even if you're using a computer." So he connects art to like real human experience and suffering. And he believes that this is something that AI fundamentally lacks. And so I was really curious to know what he thinks about this latest trend, but there's been no statement from Miyazaki or anybody at Studio Ghibli on this new trend of generating Ghibli-style images. And some people think they're just going to let their work speak for themselves. But nevertheless, I was like interested to somehow ask Miyazaki what he thinks about this, right? And there's always a way with today's technology. So what I did was I used generative AI to try to impersonate Miyazaki. So I gave all his quotes and everything that he has said publicly. And I said, I want you to think like Hayao Miyazaki and answer a few questions for me. And I got some very interesting responses, which I want to share. So I'm going to bring up my screen.
I'm very curious right now.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you don't have to figure out how do you fly to Japan, get access to him through a studio.
No.
Although that would be fun, right? That's what it's just like I think that's a different experience altogether because then the process becomes more interesting than a ChatGPT, but I'm still very, very curious.
Yeah, that would have been fun, but I took the easy route. And I asked, let me go up here. First, I asked, what do you think about the recent trend of people generating Studio Ghibli inspired images using generative AI? And so this is how Miyazaki might respond, staying true to his tone and his known views. So he says, I've seen some of those images. People say inspired by Ghibli, but to me they feel empty. He says they feel like they're just without any soul. And pretty things without soul are just decoration. I feel like that's something Miyazaki would say.
I
I feel
also
like this is a pretty
the
accurate.
the face expression that it starts with takes a long breath, follows.
Yeah. It's what I hear in his other public quotes as well, where it says art is not made by just pushing a button. It's made by observing the world, feeling stuff, and how can AI create anything that's truly alive? And so his worry is that we're forgetting how to be human. He has said things in which he thinks it is worrisome that a lot of this technology that's trying to replace artists' work is just so misplaced, because it's kind of eliminating what it means to be human. I think this answer was pretty obvious, but I wanted to probe a little bit further. And I asked, yeah, but people are just creating these images from their most memorable photos, right? And they have like fond memories attached to these images. And they just want to see it in a nice nostalgic aesthetic that Studio Ghibli style gives them. And this was the response which sort of blew my mind a little bit. He says, if these images are real memories, then perhaps they're not entirely hollow. Nostalgia is powerful and everything. But he says, I believe that this style, the so-called Ghibli look, is not what makes something Ghibli. At the end here, he says, I urge people not to settle for imitation. If you have memories, then like draw them. Like, take that effort to use your own hands, and if you were to animate them slowly, frame by frame, and let those imperfections through. So the last line here is pretty amazing. He says, this is where the magic lives, not in the style, but the soul behind it. So I think what he's trying to say, and I mean, I say it as if it's actually him, but I kind of feel like that's how he would respond. I think what he's trying to say here is Studio Ghibli is not that aesthetic that we usually think about when we think about Studio Ghibli films. It's more about preserving hand drawn art, it's more about expressing from your own lived experiences. So I think if you want to talk about Ghibli style, then just apart from the aesthetic, you have to ask two questions. One is it handmade? Even if you used the computer, did you still hand make all the artistic elements? And does it come from your own lived experience? I think those two elements are really important to define something as Ghibli style. And I had a lot of fun diving into his philosophy. And I just think as a product manager, there's a lot to be gained from philosophy. And if you're trying to get into the minds of people like Miyazaki, that's a great exercise. We'll make better products if we're more philosophical. But the trend happened, for better or for worse. We have a viral trend,
Yeah.
and I know you did a really interesting thought experiment on as a product manager, we see a viral trend like this. What can we do with it?
Yeah, I think this thought experiment is not just for Ghibli. I find myself doing that very often these days because I'm deep in interview prep, and I feel like that's the common question that you're being asked. And it's fun because I feel you have to look at things from a different perspective. And with the Ghibli art trend, I just thought, okay, what would I do if I were a product manager at TikTok? I think the first part is you don't have to like copy this and then think of a feature you can create because there's a trend. You want to like ask deeper questions and really try to understand the consumer mindset. What is it that Ghibli is unlocking that hasn't been unlocked before? Is there an emotional gap which it is filling for the consumers? And I know we talked a little bit about the nostalgia factor, the entertainment play. So I think I would try to ask questions about like why are people using Ghibli art to express themselves now as opposed to say a dolly? Like what emotional gap is it filling? How is this trend like going to shape the industry, or will it shape the industry? How can you give tools to your users and see like if that creates more engagement within the product that you have and creates an element of fun for them or not? It'll be interesting to think about these questions from this trend and see like, hey, how does that align with the strategic goals say TikTok has, and then how is this trend shifting people's perspective, people's usage of social media? And I feel like that's just a thought experiment. I don't know what the answers are, but I was just considering the questions that I would be asking because whether we like it or not, people want to use it. You share like 700 million pictures were recreated using this model within a short span of time. So there is an element that sticks with people. So it's important to understand why it sticks with people and how can we continue like serving their emotional needs by understanding the emotional gap it's filling. So as a PM, it's less about how do you mimic this trend. It's about asking the questions of should we do anything to honor the emotion that is invoking for the consumers behind it.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway from this. It just comes back to thinking critically. If you're a PM at TikTok, you could give into the trend and just be like, okay, we're good at filters. Maybe we can just create a Studio Ghibli style new feature. Maybe that's a feature that people want, but to your point of just thinking more deeply about the trend, what does it say about human psychology? What does it say about your users? What are they really looking to achieve with this trend? That's been interesting. So, as a conclusion, I think this Ghibli style image trend just epitomizes the dual edged nature of these generative technologies. On one hand, I could say it's democratizing the expression of art. But on the other side, there's a philosophical angle where, yeah, you don't want it to become a tool which replaces human artistic expression. It shouldn't be the one doing the art for us. There was an interesting line generated by Perplexity when I was doing some research on this, and I think that's a good closing quote here. It said, moving forward, the challenge lies in harnessing AI's potential without eroding the cultural and ethical foundations that sustain meaningful creativity. And I think that just summarizes this trend really, really well.
Yeah, I think it's something about like what's more meaningful. Is it like the output that you can access, or is this the effort behind it? And maybe the answer is somewhere in between. It's not like so black or white. Like you don't have to choose one, but I think it's just about the intent behind it.
Yeah, definitely. So that was a great espresso-sized episode on the Studio Ghibli trend, and I'll let you, Shivam, give your usual closing
Yeah,
statement.
I like this. So this a good format, a quick discussion. But with that, thanks for listening. Over and out.